Good morning or good afternoon, students. This is Mr. Curtis representing all of the McLaughlin fourth grade team. And today we're going to be doing the second half of our 6-2, which are fractions that add to 1. The information, content, and graphics comes from Houghton-Mifflin-Harcourt, our textbook. And so the targets for today are to do a quick review and comparison notation. Trust me, that sounds uglier than it really is. You'll probably know this pretty quickly. And the second part is going to be comparing the unit fractions. That's where we're going to do most of our digging today. So let's start with comparison notation. This is something that you guys learned a while ago, so you're probably experts at this. But just to review, comparison just means using less than and greater than symbols to denote which value is greater, or less than, or equal to. So if Ryan has 4 chips and Diane has 7 chips, who has more? Well, you would know that in comparison notation, the symbol that has its mouth, so to speak, open is going to face the larger value. So when we read a comparison of an inequality, like the solution, we would read it from left to right. So 4 is less than 7. That is probably the quickest way to read that and the most correct. So that's comparison notation. Remember, greater than, less than, and equal to. See, I told you it wasn't that painful. Excuse me. So today we're going to be really focusing on comparing unit fractions. We can use pie graphs like these: half, 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5. Those are all unit fractions because there's one piece out of the whole. All right, and then you can also use fraction bars. Here's another graphic. Here's a half. Here's a third. Here's a fourth or a quarter. And here's a fifth. For some of you like percentages, those are some percentages. These numbers here denote the decimal value, like if you're working with money. So half is equal to 50 cents. And here is the word form of that. So that's what comparison of unit fractions can start to look like. So we're going to compare unit fractions. Here we have a third, and here we have a fifth. Now, I did the pre-work to make sure that the wholes are the same size. It wouldn't be fair to compare a 1/5 of a football field to 1/5 of a four-square game. So they have to be the same hole size. So just to verify, you can kind of see that those holes are the same. 1 out of 5, 1/5, comparing 1/3. Which is greater? In your mind, or say it out loud, which one is greater? All right, so one way to kind of use these graphs, these pie charts, I should say, is if I were to move it, I can kind of compare which one is greater. This is just proving it by you moving the shapes. So here, and I put this mark here, that shows you the comparison of a fifth and a third. So when I move it back, this space here is a fifth, so you can actually see that a third actually has more space. Therefore, a third is much greater than 1/5 is. Okay? So let's think about that. A third with a 3 as the denominator is greater than the unit fraction of 1/5 with a 5 as its denominator. So in summary, would you read this with me? In summary, when comparing unit fractions, the unit fraction with the greater denominator, like 1/5 above, the 5 is greater than the 3, will actually be less than the unit fraction with the lesser denominator of 1/3 here. The 3 by itself is less than the 5, but because they're unit fractions, this is divided 3 ways or into thirds, this one into 5 ways. So you're sharing more into fifths divided by 5. So The smaller the denominator, the greater size the piece. The lesser the denominator, the bigger the piece. The greater the denominator, the smaller the fraction piece is. Remember that. Let's do some practice. We're going to practice in our notebooks. So we're going to use the fraction bars to help you compare the unit fractions. Now in your notebooks, please write the whole inequality, including the greater than or less than symbols. Hint, none of them will be equal. So here's a fraction bar, and what I'm going to do is lift the screen here, and I'm going to play a video, and I want you to copy kind of the setup before we start doing the work. So set this up. When you set up your math worksheet comparing these unit fractions, make sure you, like in class, we regularly write the title. So this is going to be 6-2B setup. And then give yourself some space between these inequalities. Again, they're not equal, so they're called inequalities. Make sure they're legible, which means your parents and I could read them. Your teachers can read them when you take screenshots. And so you're going to write this out as neatly as you can. You could probably do even a better job than I did. And then we are going to have a puzzle penguin at the end. So skip some lines and then write Dear Puzzle Penguin, comma, and then your answer. So I want a complete answer. Your teachers and I want a complete answer with your thinking in the space provided. And so we're looking forward to seeing your thinking, your math thinking, and your solutions to these inequalities here. All right, would you take a moment, push pause, and copy these problems below, please? Okay, if you are done, then be ready to, I'll show you the answers, the responses. If you're not, push pause. And so we're going to go ahead and look at the first few problems here. All right, so let's go magnify it up. All right, so the first problem was 1/6 is actually more than 1/9. Number 2, 1/5 is greater than 1/8. And we're going to demonstrate that. I'm going to take this 1/8 piece and I'm going to prove it with my manipulative here. And I'm going to show that 1/5 is substantially greater than 1/8. Number 3, 1/3 is slightly greater than 1/4. You can see it's a little bit more there. Number 4, 1/2 is actually much greater than 1/8, even though the unit fraction has a 2 in the denominator. Remember, the smaller the denominator, the larger the pieces. And the last one, we don't have a fraction bar, but if you thought about it, 1/7 is actually much greater than 1/15. Because 15, you're 1 out of 15. If you took 15 free throws and you only made 1, that's worse than if you took 7 free throws and made that same 1 as a unit fraction. So these are the responses to those questions. Before we get to the puzzle penguin, I'm going to show you a short video that I'd like you to set up, so you're going to need some supplies for that. For today's quick unit fraction manipulatives, we're going to use and need scissors, something to write with, notebook paper, and if you'd like, I think if you have Post-it notes would be quicker and faster, but you can use either one. You don't have to have both. I recommend Post-it notes, though, if you can, if you have it. If not, you can use notebook paper. And so the first thing you're going to do is take your Post-it note, and you're going to basically make halves. And you're then going to also do the same thing and make thirds and make fourths or quarters. So with half, you want to go halfway across the Post-it note or the notebook paper and draw a vertical line down the middle. Write the unit fraction of 1/2 or 1/2. For thirds, you don't want to go halfway. You want to go a little bit in towards the edge and draw a line about here vertically going down, and do the same thing about half of the distance between this line and the end, and that creates an outer third, and shade in one of those three parts and write the unit fraction of 1/3. And for fourths, very similar to halves, start with a half line vertically, and then from there you can go half the distance from the edge to the halfway point, draw a vertical line, and do the same thing halfway the distance between this half line and the edge, and draw a vertical line here, and write in your unit fraction of 1/4 and lightly shade. If you want to use notebook paper, I've done a couple here where you're doing a half, third, and the same thing with fourth. If I'm using quarters or fourths, I'm going to first start off with my vertical line of symmetry going all the way down, and then half the distance from the half line to the end, so about here. If they're not exact, that's okay. Just do your best. And then I'm going to do the same thing, half the distance between this line and the end. And I would pick one of those four, and I have my unit fraction of 1/4. For this, though, for the interest of speed, I'm just going to use, the next step is going to use my scissors, and I'm going to cut out each of these unit fractions. I like the Post-its because you can stick them. Discard the cutouts of the fractions you're not using. And again, these aren't necessarily perfect, but they're pretty close, and they give you a general idea. So when you have these unit fractions, what do you notice? And let's talk about the denominator, the number and the fractions at the bottom. What do you notice? Well, if you said that you have a 2 in the denominator, which is the lowest of the three denominators, it reaped the largest unit fraction, you're correct. The 4 normally is greater than the 3, but in this case, you can kind of see that in comparison, the fourth, let me move that for you, is actually, is less than a third. Therefore, it's also less than half. And you can see that when you kind of move them around a little bit, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece, because we're dividing it with less people, right? So half is greater than a third, and a third is greater than a fourth. So that's this part of the manipulative. Hopefully you guys are going to do some drawing, some cutting, and to see if that always holds true. Okay, so hopefully you did that part of the manipulative where you actually did the cutting, just to show you that it really does make sense when we're comparing unit fractions. Just to really have hands-on. We're going to finish up this math lesson with a puzzle penguin. You probably remember that from class. So puzzle penguin, here we go. This is from page 202. And puzzle penguin wrote, "Dear math students, I had to compare 1/4 and 1/2 on my math homework. I reasoned," the puzzle penguin said, "that 1/4 is greater than 1/2 because 4 is greater than 2. Now my cousin told me that isn't correct. Can you help me understand why my reasoning is wrong? Signed, your friend, the puzzle penguin." So on your notebook paper, you have some puzzle penguin space at the bottom. We really want to hear and see that you're using mathematical vocabulary in a complete answer form. I'd like your sentence frame to start off with, "Dear puzzle penguin, comma, space, your answer of," and then defend your answer mathematically with the math terms that we've learned today and we've used all year. Hopefully you guys had a good time on this lesson. We look forward to you sending in pictures, and take care and good luck on your quiz after this lesson. Bye now.